Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 15th reading in the Speculative Sundays poetry reading series, where every other week you can hear the poetry of possibilities. We are live on Facebook via Zoom. I'm Akua Leslie Hope, speaking to you from the ancestral land of the Onondaga, also known as the Seneca, keepers of the Western Door in the Southern Finger Lakes region of New York State. I pay homage to the Seneca, past, present, and future, as I do to my own ancestors by whose grace I exist and am sustained. This event is funded in part by poets and writers with public funds from the New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of Governor Andrew Cuomo and the New York State Legislature. Speculative poetry that we're going to hear this evening. The poetry of possibilities includes alternate history, cryptids, monsters, cyberpunk, dystopia, fairy tales, fabulism, fantasy, folklore, futurism, horror, magic, mythology, occult, paranormal, robots, science fiction, shifters, slipstream, solar punk, space opera, superheroes, supernatural, sword and sorcery, sword and soul, steampunk, time travel, post-apocalyptic, and weird. It takes all poetic forms, plus one called Sci by Ku. I'd like to introduce Jennifer Crow, who lives near a waterfall in Western New York on the traditional lands of the, and she'll have to help me pronounce it, Haudenosaunee. I hope I didn't do that.
That's about as close as I would get.
Okay. She decided she wanted to be a writer at the age of 8 and never outgrew her childhood ambition. She focuses mainly on science fiction, fantasy, and speculative poetry. She's received several Riesling Award nominations, an Eldon Award nomination for her second poetry collection, The First Bite of the Apple, and honorable mentions and a half dozen editions of the year's best fantasy and horror and the year's best horror anthologies. Her work is included in Asimov science fiction, analog science fiction, Uncanny Magazine, Liminality and Kaleidotrope, Goblin Fruit, Abyss and Apex, Mythic Delirium, Mythala Review, and Strange Horizons, among others. For 2021, she's putting together another poetry collection. We look forward to that, about a museum full of cursed objects, and planning an Advent anthology to celebrate the end of the year. In her spare time, how could she have any? She's been reading poetry submissions for the latest incarnation of Amazing Stories. When she's not writing, she's busy taking care of her family, volunteering for various groups, knitting, hunting for fossils, and reading. Welcome, Jennifer Crow.
Thank you so much, Akua. It's wonderful to be here, and I appreciate everyone who's come. To start with, I wanted to read a few poems from the new collection that Akua mentioned, the Museum of Cursed Objects. A friend got me started and the poems kept coming, and so I thought I would take you on a little mini tour of my museum. So we'll start in the garden. This is the garden of the wind beasts. Equinox signals their awakening. Stick leg totter from winter's shelter into slanting sunlight over grass, over moss, over sand strewn with storm flotsam and broken shells. Cloth sails unfurled to catch a delicate breath of zephyr from the south. A bird's call to gather like payment for patience during the long, cold night. Staggered sequence of steps, each plunging and planted in turn, arms joined by a reticulated pattern of cord, muscle strung and knotted, side slip travel on joints of wood and wire, a nightmare's fuel brought to life. Enchanted beasts given a form of existence. Become not as the wind beasts, serene until the storm shatters their illusion, but as flesh pins itself to bone, pulse cascading and returning, the hot rush of mortality unbent in a harsh wind, wise enough to seek shelter until the worst passes. Pity the wind beasts, scattered by cyclones and buried in late snows, or incinerated in summer's hot breath of flame gouting out of dark clouds, rendering life to ash. So from the garden, we step into the entrance, and that brings us under the rotunda. Who brings children to a museum of the damned? A learning experience, teachers call it, clustered beneath the fresco of gilt-edged laborers and tormented saints, organizing their flocks into double lines, call and response rippling across the room and echoing from the steep curves of the rotunda. On the central dais looms something prehistorical, bulked muscle and bristled back, an atavistic rendering of a creature we domesticated in another age. Scimitar tusks, thick as a forearm, circle a jaw full of sharp yellow teeth. The placard speaks of Heracles on Mount Erymanthus, brutal battle, demigod pounded to earth by hooves the size of hubcaps. Though they lacked hubcaps in those days, the teacher says to her bored charges. It's just a big pig, they tell her. They learned to laugh at oinking sounds before kindergarten, and now it signals rebellion, contempt of authority, general silliness. A teacher flaps her arms, reluctant shepherd guiding her lambs, but they don't listen until the boar lifts one shining gray hoof and stamps it twice on the marble dais. Sober, quiet now, the children skitter ahead of their teacher, heading for the wide staircase and the Hall of Curiosities. So now we're in the Hall of Curiosities. And this one is called Wax Eye, Slightly Damaged, which was published recently. Chips in painted blue suggest a certain shadow in the gaze, a lacuna hiding ugly truths or convenient fictions, a blank, dislocated existence, untethered to form or function. Heat deforms wax, and hell unleashes its fury through wicked glances formed in satanic mills and stuffed into ceramic faces. Once she stared at sleeping children, unblinking malice conveyed with all the silent weight her makers could summon. Once she rested splay-legged on a high shelf and whispered demented wishes into the night. Pluck this orb, fold it in a silk kerchief, and store it in a box where some unwary descendant will find it and gaze into the cursed abyss of manufactured monsters. And yeah, continuing on in the Hall of Curiosities, I give you some piscine dreams. It will not spoil the story to tell you the mermaid isn't real. You already suspected, and in fact smirked as you read the stained card taped to the side of this case. After all these years, careful stitches stand out against shrunken skin, linking monkey torso to fishtail, tiny, even sutures, creating nightmare out of fantasy. It lifts its ragged and twisted fingers to cover its gaping, toothless mouth, exaggerated horror, mocking gullible tourists crowded around its case. And it savors the smell of salt-cured fish rising from its own body. Years have worn away fine hair and scales in patches, mildew linking what evolution did not. When the lights go down, even fake mermaids dream of coral reefs and the slow shadows of sharks cruising with the currents, kelp fronds caressing, waves lifting, and dropping, whisper and lunge with the moon's silver rhythm. Even creatures constructed from imagination and twine and corpses know the sea's ways, the cradling tides, a birthplace for dreams in the spaces outside reality. And now that we've had a little tour, we're going to the souvenir shop. This one was published recently in Wondrous Reel magazine, which is a new literary magazine that likes stuff that's kind of in the margins between reality and wonder. Listless in the eternal hellscape of the souvenir shop. A sign above the door invites you to bring a curse home. Tatty kitsch in heaps, overflowing the clear plastic bins, dividing miniature 8-balls from magnets emblazoned with dire portents. A docent lounges against the counter, bored eyes drifting from face to face, as if memorizing you for a test. The broken legs of Ozymandias keep company with acts of aberrant taxidermy, and all the paintings in the art room watch clattering tesserae of porphyry and agate drip through your fingers, the memory of ruined palaces. Shelves hold thin volumes of local ghost stories, cheaply printed, fat histories full of half-truths, grimoires bound in cheap leather, already parting at the corners, but none of it enlightens. You choose a ragged bun adrift from its head, strands of discolored hair shaped and held with worn sticks and rusted pins. A Roman matron wore the original, her soul condemned to eternity in a hall over the cafe that smells of burnt coffee beans and stale potato chips. Alas, we all diminish in death, but until the grim end knocks on your door, you can pretend to wait for a Caesar's return. The docent smiles as she slips a lead curse tablet into your bag, no larger than a playing card or a sales receipt. An odor reminiscent of incense wafts from the back seat as you drive away. A whispered call to old gods and rulers, telling them their hour has come round again at last. So that was a mini tour of the Museum of Cursed Objects. So I'm hoping to put together the whole collection and start looking for a home for it later this year. One of the things I really love is folklore and mythology. So a lot of my poems hark back to that. And I studied Russian in high school and college. So I try to put a little bit of Russian mythology and folklore into my poems. This one is called Iron Teeth, and it's about Baba Yaga. The season of ripe grain has passed. Insects have fallen silent. Birds sweep south, dark wings against a sullen sky. You worship summer's god too late, and his chapel stands empty, nave a mosaic of dead leaves and broken nests. When winter bites me, I return wound for wound, my iron teeth gouging bits of cloud to reveal the cold silver bowl of the moon, brimful of sorrow for the summer child. Listen closely when the wind stills, and you might catch the clatter of my iron jaw hammering out painful truths in the flesh of the world. I am my own wild hunt, hungering for the give of soft skin and the salty tang of blood. Run if you must. My appetite only grows with the delay, and my altar waits for the offering promised by winter's gathering darkness. I know the plains of your face as I know the plains of this land, and though you cannot trick me, I might give a boon to one so fair of heart, who does not flinch to see my iron grin. Bend close, so I may whisper the secret of flight in the pink curve of your ear, and we will travel the night together, witches born of fate's meddling hand, unbowed, full of rage. I'm lucky to have 3 fantastic kids, and occasionally I write poems for them. I wanted to share one tonight that I wrote for my daughter, Emily. It's called Here We Are Dragons. With our wings folded against our backs, we seem almost human. Our scales a fragile glint like jewels, and the smoke curling from our nostrils, just a sign of life on a cold morning. We have given up our piles of gold and gems for knowledge, hoarding wisdom in our closets and cupboards, or with the clumps of dust beneath the bed. You might mistake us for human women, mortal and frail, or perhaps fierce but broken, because that story makes us seem more pliant, our nature erased the way a hard rain washes away portraits of chalk or footprints on the path. You might mistake us for ordinary beings until that moment when our jaws gape wide and our claws unsheath. We allow you that last error as we draw in our breath and howl a firestorm. No, we do not respect your authority, nor even recognize it, for it was never asked of us, only taken, until we summoned the will to seize it back. Okay, so the next couple are ones that were published in Uncanny magazine a while back. And I really love that market because they look for stuff that makes me stretch as a writer. And so I'm always looking for, what can I do next that will create something new and wonderful that will catch their eye. I think every writer has those dream markets that they love to work with because they feel so new and fresh with what they're doing. So the first one is called The Book of Ruins. Some ruins are not meant for rebuilding. Jumbled stones with crumbling corners, a slope of gravel that once bore the face of a god, the lake of unknown depth from which a lone bell tolls on stormy nights, the abbey with its gray ghosts and broken pillars lets moonlight flood the grass, the past a silver spill, all blood and rage erased, eroded. Some ruins pierce the heart with their jagged edges, or tangle memory with towering hedges in knots that fill your nostrils with the sharp spice of berries not quite ripe, the bare musk of danger lurking in shadow. All ruins belong in another time, but some lean out of a different world, a menace of borders unseen and felt only by the sensitive skin at the base of the skull. Those ruins hold the riches of death, the coin of murder, of war, of the slow fade the lover sees when sun casts too bright a glare on the skin. And in the abbey, where grass makes the floor and heaven the ceiling, the ghosts pray, silent hands lifted to beseech some hidden deity. Count fate into your open palm. See how doom shines when light hits at the right angle. And you have dropped a burden, a million broken bricks, shattered marble plinths, mirror shards, and spalling plaster. But nothing compares, not crystal chips shining like diamond, not flakes of gold gleaming in the dust. None of it is like the wound you left, the gaping maw at the heart of me. And now, sitting among the tattered leaves of psaltery and scripture, I wonder if you walked away knowing no one could repair the damage, not with all eternity and a world as a foundation, not with hope for a blueprint and passion to frame the walls. And the next one is called The Automaton Falls in Love. People sometimes ask, where do you get your ideas from? And the basis of this was a post someone made on Twitter talking about automatons made in medieval times and in Renaissance times and how ornate they were and how intricate. And so the swan that I talk about in this poem is an actual swan that somebody made. And then the rest of it came out of my brain. The automaton falls in love. On a glass pond, the silver swan dips its head and swallows tiny iron fish. Quick, jerking gulps. Someone carved each feather with forgotten techniques, and the bird winds down over decades, gears growing blunt-edged and bent. I put you on a pedestal where no rust could touch, nor careless child crush or crack. Did you thank me? No, your breath, scented with the finest lubricating oil, mutters the air like flocks of migrant geese in an ugly mood. You threaten to jump, batter the sky with cold fists of copper. What is love but protection, worship, infinite solicitude for a partner held captive by the slow decay of gear and piston? I know how time wears down even the bravest. You need not accept tremors of metal and glass as fate. I will make you safe, unchanged by whatever death makes of our kind. The swan grinds to a halt, beak caught halfway open and iron fish out of reach. Mortals wind its key as springs tick and tremble within, the metal circulatory system beating like your fists, its stubborn gears frozen like you on your marble plinth. Something glints in its onyx eyes, not malice, but an implacable truth, a pause, a falter, a shattering disappointment hidden beneath a silver breast. So this poem, I love. I think probably my favorite mythological or folkloric being is the Selkie, the seal people of the Irish and the Scottish. And so this poem is one that I wrote that was published in Dreams and Nightmares a while back about a Selkie. And this is her story. It's called Take Up Your Skin. Mooncast waters, star-sunk tides, and dawn measuring out the captive current of your life. Mother of pearl for the wife, mother of pearl for the barred windows and chill floors, for the roof curving over the marriage bed. You would surrender it all for the cool brush of kelp across your back, the way small fish caress your face and dart free when you turn to snap. This life, shorebound, heartbound, this life of dishes and fingers, needle pricked and raw, of vegetables in rows, and cows that low as they make their way home in the gloaming, udders dripping, big eyes beseeching shelter. You murmur to them, words of land speech that tangle your tongue. You learn to say love, to say kiss, to say home. But the flavor chokes you on nights like this, when moonlight chases a road across the sea, and you hear your sisters, your brothers playing in the surf. They say every Selkie must love a human once, must learn the different tastes of sea and sweat on skin. You know where he buried your skin, distrust walled with stone and packed down under a layer of clay. He never understood you only stayed for this human lesson, love, and no spawn of earth could hold you if you wish to be free. Shrug off the human guise you wear. Under it, the sea still runs close to the surface, and in a moment, you blink eyes made for the depths, test paws tipped for the hunt, bare teeth that long for the flesh of living fish. And will you hunger for the human world? Some bright morning when your head tops the waves and you hear the voices of children and see walls grayed by time and storm. Will you know your lover when age and time have bent him? It matters, or it matters not. You are what you've always been, and you are more, and you are gone. So, among other things, I'm also a history nerd. Oh, did you want to say something? No? Okay. I'm a history nerd, and so I sometimes see the magic in the stories that we tell about our world and about its past. And there's something I think kind of magical, kind of romantic about the idea of people traveling to different places in ancient times. And we tend to think of the past as everybody being very insular, but in fact, there were a lot of people who were curious about the world and wanted to see different places. And this poem is about them. It's called Silk Road. Who follows the road beyond the city? ghosts whirling dust under sunset skies, and wizard folk sweeping the bone-strewn path with the long hems of tattered robes, stitched in tarnished sigils and scented by skin and spice. The guilty creep through moonlit valleys. The hopeful hurry across mountain passes. The lost gather berries and mourn kin with their ancient songs. Some merchant, weighted with sharp-hued bolts of cloth, bags of pearls, saffron and pepper bottled and sealed, watches the horizon for storm clouds or bandits riding swift steeds. 1,000 hearts have broken on this road. 1,000,000 coins have spilled in the sand. Untold dreams have vanished like sweat, drying in the breeze. A bird curls over the hills. A wild horse raises red banners from the summer earth. And I cast a summoning woven from memory and the captive salt of your tears. So to continue on a bit with the idea of traders and markets, this one's a little stranger. This one is Raven's Market. He says, "You must not touch," his sharp nose pointing at the tray of artifacts, thin lips peeled back in a slantwise grin. He says this as he turns the brightest trinket toward the light, letting it catch fire and spark in your eye. Goblins and trolls, fairies and foxes gather in knots, whispering, nudging you away from the broad oaken counter of the shop. You stand firm, a stone in the current to part the lesser, the fearful. You clutch gold in your hand, a stack of coins heavy with the promise of victory and surrender, possibilities to count and tally and ring up before you pay. That bright brooch, gems the color of citrine and forbidden spices. That one, you say, and your hand only shakes a little as you point. The groundlings murmur and bob their heads, masks slipping a little as they tell stories behind gnarled hands of other foolish mortals, other bad choices. They don't know you, your plan, your need. The raven flicks black hair from his eyes and welcomes your gold to his bosom, a glint and gone. The brooch becomes yours, already a tarnish on the metal, the stone's less bright. But as the raven flies, his coat a feathering wing, his grin a clatter of beak, his cry breaks against your brow as a kind of luck you make yourself to beat the hunters, the judges, the multitude of pointing fingers in the market, and on the far side of the journey to wisdom. So this next poem delves a little bit into my own family's history. It looks like both of my parents have women in their past who were jailed during the Salem witch trials. So I find that really interesting, and I've been reading a lot about the events in Salem and find it really interesting and kind of like the thought of these two cantankerous and rebellious women who didn't fit in my family's past. So this poem is called Inheritance. If I carry your blood or some element of your being, nose shape, jut of chin, in the twisted strands of my cells, perhaps I carry your rage as well, the eremite madness that casts you in the role of village madwoman and witch. Something in me no longer wishes to play nice. The heart wants what it wants. Of course, but what if this blackened knot of muscle clutches stillborn desires? What if I want the poisoned apple, the gallows tree, the crumbling stone wall to show where a town once taunted me? What if my heart's aching can break a strong man or warp a god's benevolence? Wrath sparks on my tongue like the taste of autumn cider, and I churn heat from the earth with every step nearer the crossroads. If the world wishes to see something fearful in my gaze, then I will give them that, and a pyre on which to burn. So from the past to the future, I wrote this poem, The Sequence of Events, on the birth of my first grandbaby. Something happened at this hotel. I imagine joy, or at least the intimate silliness of longtime friends gathered for a bachelorette weekend or an overnight birthday party, making a grand escape to the suites of this hotel in DeSoto, Texas, a room overlooking air conditioning units and downtown Dallas's distant towers like a child's building blocks spilled out of a box hidden beyond the horizon. Something cheerful happened here. Sequins and metallic confetti lurking in every corner, under the table, behind the toilet. A moment's bright surprise, abandoned after the party. We are no less celebratory, waiting for word of our first grandchild's arrival in this world. Auspicious, despite the year's sullen progression from disaster to disaster. We have survived long enough and will hold that new life close. Her future smiles, the confetti decorating our existence, the sequence of events we hope to see. And I've got one last one. This is Portals and Portents. Rush of wings, darkness clinging, cloying scent of spice and earth mold. Time judders on its tracks and space shivers. Stars out of true, doom perhaps deferred, if not sped up. Figures clashing sparks of will and woe across a field bent sideways in service of fate. And this whispered lament echoes through doorways and calls the bones secreted under foundation stone and hearth, and the blackbirds circle beneath clouds spun up from river and sea. Endless curves drawn on the sky as their cries shatter and fall, jagged glass to bless the earth. So we live here now, beginning the ending as we always expected, written in our stars.
I was trying to find my unmute. That was fabulous.
Thank you so much.
That was fabulous. Oh my gosh.
I really enjoyed sharing those.
Oh my gosh. They were so, I loved your language.
Thank you.
The specificity of your images and how each time for each thing we enter the world and you give us taste and touch and scent. You know, you use the body, and that's really interesting and compelling to me, that it doesn't stay in the head, that you center so much in the body. I mean, I've got to say, I've got predilections, so I have favorites. Like I love the dragon poem, and I love the selfie poem, but I was also, and I hope I wrote it down, and maybe I didn't, but the whole idea that you introduced in the Museum of Cursed Things, about even having that you even endowed the created thing with the ability to imagine and feel and experience. That was just, I look forward to this collection. This collection's very exciting. And I wanted to tell you that you need to write a poem about the bored docent, because I think the bored docent has seen a lot of stuff. And, and I love the souvenir shop. That, I mean, I think it's just a brilliant construct, but I was actually taken aback at first, because even though in reading your bio, I said horror, what I've seen of your work has not been horror. It's been mainly what I would consider SF and F.
Right.
So do you want to talk a little bit about what horror is for you, where horror sits for you, versus or in addition to science fiction and fantasy?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's such a permeable border, right? it's hard to draw a line between, this is horror and this is fantasy and this is science fiction, because they blend together in a lot of ways. There was a big argument on Twitter last week about, is the movie Alien horror as well as science fiction? Which, most people are like, yeah, of course it is.
Right.
It's a scary movie. But, some people found it really implausible because it's science fiction. They're in space. And, so the one person that I thought discussed it particularly eloquently was a man who's an agent for a couple of friends of mine. And he talked about how horror is a mood. And, so it has kind of a different shape than science fiction and fantasy. That when we talk about science fiction, we have certain tropes. There's space, there's spaceships, there's ray guns. We have a certain image in our mind of Star Trek or Star Wars or The Expanse or various other things like that. Or with fantasy, there's wizards, there's dragons. Horror doesn't have the same trappings. It can take place anywhere. It's all about the mood you're trying to evoke. And so with the Museum of Cursed Objects, I'm kind of thinking about, I want people to think about our past in different ways. I was talking about this with a friend of mine that to me, as I learn more about history and not just the white bread history that we tend to learn in elementary and high school, but the darker parts of our history about colonialism and about the abuses of minorities and things, that I think it's important to have some kind of reckoning with that. One of the poems I didn't read tonight is one I want to work on a little bit more. It's called Disappointment Room. And the idea was that for families who had enough space in their house, if you had a child who was handicapped in some way, that they couldn't go out and do things as normal children would, you would have a disappointment room and keep them there.
Wow.
And that was an actual thing. And they've found some houses where you can actually see them.
Oh my.
People posted on, I think, Imager.
No, that's amazing. I've never heard of that.
They'd bought an old house. They went up into the attic and there was like a whole other space inside the attic with a door and a bed. And they asked some historian in the town, what is this? And they said, oh, that's a disappointment room.
Were they imprisoned there?
Basically, yes.
Institutionalized at home?
Right.
I've got to check that out. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was.
And what a name for it, the disappointment room.
Right. And that just, it hit me as a mother.
Yes.
Imagining families making those choices because 100 years ago there weren't the resources that we have to help kids who need more.
Right.
And you would have expectations. This child is going to help on the farm. This child is going to take over the family business. Well, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. But it's horrifying for the child too, yes. That they don't have that nurturing and love that a child should expect.
That they're locked away.
Right.
That's an amazing construct. And thank you. I'm going to file that away. But I want to stay with you because back to the whole idea that horror is a mood. When you were talking about the mermaid, so that evoked the fantasy, and then the constructed mermaid that was still in the fantasy, realm. But then, yes, the mood changed, and it slipped into something else. But I wouldn't even, that's the other thing that I'm wrestling with as I'm reading more. Well, you said it was permeable, so okay.
Yes.
So you already answered that. I won't keep poking at that. It's that we still do have these little boxes, and I was
right.
No, it slipped away from what I think of as traditionally horror, but I was discomfited, in much of it. I'm very excited about that project. I look forward to reading it when you've done.
Thanks.
When did you start writing, And again, after you've already talked about permeability. But when did you start writing speculative poetry? So horror is included in that umbrella.
I think my very first poem when I was 8 was speculative.
Oh my gosh, me too. But tell me about your 8-year-old poem.
My 8-year-old poem. Well, we were studying poetry in my class. It was second or third grade, and I don't know why I thought I could do this, but my dad had brought home some
We know
scrap
why.
paper from work.
Your poems already told us why.
Well, it's true, but my dad brought home this bunch of scratch paper from work, and I got to say that my parents have always been super supportive of my writing, and I really appreciate that about them. So he gave me this paper and a pencil and said, go do something outside with this.
Ah.
So I took my paper and pencil and I went and sat under an apple tree on my parents' farm, and I started writing. And let's see if I can remember this. You guys, you're lucking out because I've never done this poem out loud to anyone before.
Oh, thank you.
But with a giant bellow, the universe rung when a bee had sorrow and the earth was stung. And I was so freaking proud of myself because it rhymed.
You should have been.
I was. And
With
so
a giant bellow. And you know what I just thought of? You just told me two things. Okay, let me let you finish that and I'll tell you the other two things.
that was all I had to say, but yes.
No. Well, okay, so the other poem I was going to ask you to talk about was the Selfie Poem, but now you've given us 2 clues to it. You grew up on a farm.
Right.
And that's why you have that incredible line about the cow.
Yes.
I was just like, oh my gosh, the Selfie relates to the, for me, that was, I don't know, I'm silly, but it was so powerful for me when in the Selfie poem, you have the Selfie talking about life, but it's not just about the lover, and it's not just about the things, the other creature. And I was just like, oh, that's so brilliant. But now we know why. Tell us about the farm. So the farm, it's in your work.
It was a little farm in Maine. My parents had about 15 acres. And
were you by the sea also?
Not quite. My grandmother had a house by the sea, and so we'd go to visit her. And my sister and I would spend some time with her every summer and stay in her little house that had no running water and no electricity. So we were really rustic.
That sounds beautiful though.
But the farm, it was a small farm. We had like maybe an acre or 2 of vegetables planted, and we had pigs and chickens and a cow, and my sister and I had sheep. I had a sister that had a pony that was really badly behaved, dogs and cats and ducks, and just a little bit of everything. So it was kind of a fun way to grow up.
Oh, it sounds fabulous. What among that menagerie was yours? What were your responsibilities?
The sheep. My sister and I each had a couple of sheep, and we'd have lambs every spring. And so this time of year, somebody posted a picture of a lamb, and I could feel the lamb in my hands, because you'd pick them up because they were tiny and cute, and the feel of their wool, these little tiny nubbins, and the way they smelled a little bit of lanolin from their mom's wool, and the warmth of them. And then you put them down and they do the thing called pronking, where they spring up on all 4 feet, which is just delightful.
There's a name for that.
It's called pronking.
Pronking?
Yep. Pronking.
And is it specifically for lambs leaping?
It's that 4-legged leap that, antelope do it too and stuff, but that's the name for it, which I love. That's one of my favorite verbs.
I like that. I'm going to try and use that too. Pronking in disappointment rooms. You're teaching us much tonight.
I am trying. Well, you talk about
keep trying
specificity.
Yes.
You talk about specificity,
yes.
and I think that's really the key to creating speculative poetry that moves people.
Yes.
Because we're dealing so much with imagination.
Right.
And it's so easy to lose folks because this is weird and different, and I don't have anything to anchor it.
That's what I loved about your work. And I said you grounded it in the body, but now I'm realizing that it's not just my body, the body,
Right.
but that you've got this life experience that connects you with all these other creatures. So when you're writing these creature things, you're making us feel that. Do you call up those recollections as you're writing?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, they're powerful, right?
Yeah, well,
Those things that
your
we
work
feel
is
in the body are
beautiful, but yes.
the things that we feel in the body.
Mhm,
The deep emotions, but also the physical sensations. Those are the things that stick with us.
mhm.
Yeah, I mean, sense of smell. Have you ever smelled something and it took you back immediately to something that happened years ago, or a place? I can. I was walking along and I smelled something. I think I was in downtown Buffalo, so it was a city smell,
Mhm.
and something about it was it took me back to when I was in high school. I went on a trip to what was then the Soviet Union,
Wow.
and we were in Azerbaijan in the city of Baku,
Oh my
and
gosh.
we got these ice cream cones, and we're in the old city. And they have, I can still see it. There's what they called the Maiden Tower, which was, a tower built to hold this maiden that the king didn't want to marry off to somebody else or whatever.
Oh,
So that was a whole story.
that's a great
But
story too.
but the taste of the ice cream, the feel of the heat, because it's a kind of a desert area, and that smell, just for an instant I was back there with the ice cream cone in my hand in that particular place and time.
Wow.
And our senses are so powerful that way.
Mhm.
They, our vision, our hearing, our smell, our taste can draw us to different places. And I think that's one of the things that makes poetry powerful.
Well, I loved your Silk Road poem.
Oh, thank you.
I love that also. And its companion, the one that followed. So was that at all informed by some of that experience, or just
A
your
little bit, yeah.
research on? Okay, I wondered if that's what drew you to it.
But mostly my history nerdery.
Your history notary.
Yep.
And I'm and here's another connection. And so that's why you knit, because you had sheep and you sheared them and you know about
Yes.
wool. Do you spin?
I'm learning to spin badly.
What?
A friend of mine is teaching me, but it's very lumpy and it kind of tends to separate. So my friend wants to do a sheep to shawl, where she gets a raw fleece, cleans it, cards it, spins it, and everything. And I'm very impressed by her because she will actually follow through and do this. I'm like, I'll just get the spun yarn. I mean, it's nice to learn how, and I suppose if worst came to worst, I could actually have the skill to spin my own yarn so I can keep crocheting, but it doesn't appeal to me as much as the actual act of crocheting does. That sense of putting things in order is really nice.
Now that's interesting. You just said crocheting, but in your bio, I had said knitting.
I do both, but the last couple of years I've switched more to crochet.
Okay, we've got to talk.
We do.
Let's talk later. Let's talk later.
Absolutely.
How so? You are now editing for Amazing Stories, and one of the things I'm really, really curious about is how editing affects your writing now that you're an editor and looking at and deciding on other people's work. Does that affect you? How does that affect you? I can't imagine you're not affected in some way by this. And
Oh, definitely. I mean, for one thing, you know, everyone always says read the guidelines. And then you become an editor and you're like, this is why they always say read the guidelines, because it's such a pain when somebody doesn't listen and you have to like get them to resubmit or. So, but I'm an idiot writer, so I still make mistakes, but I do try. I think the thing that has really affected me is Amazing Stories has a very specific goal in mind as a publication, that they wanted to kind of get that golden age gee whiz feeling in what they published. So, stuff that's more hopeful, which I think, certain aspects of the community has kind of drifted away from for very good reasons.
The original Star Trek.
Yes, and I see some value in having work that does have that mood. because I think we do need a sense of hopefulness about the future. Um,
Now,
so
for
when I
the
sit down to read submissions, I look at it and you know, I say, is this science fiction?
right.
And is it hopeful? And I will say that by and large, almost all the submissions that we've gotten were poems that were very good, that were publishable by somebody. But a lot of times they didn't have the positive spin.
Ah,
And,
it's
and
hard right now, so,
yeah. And that's neither here nor there, because somebody will love it. And my stuff doesn't always have a positive spin. So, but
we noticed.
I'm not telling you any secrets there.
No.
But I learned to think more about how I'm presenting my work and what I'm sending where, if that makes sense. So, when I'm setting out to send something to somebody, I'm thinking,
it's no longer just that it's a good poem.
Right.
Does it share the philosophy of the publication that you're sending?
Right. So is this an uncanny poem?
Right.
Is this an Asimov's poem? Because they're both great publications, but
they're very different.
They're very different in what they're, and not just in terms of subject matter, but length and mood. And, so learning to do that, I think, as someone who wants to be a published writer,
so it's
important.
It's changed how and to whom you send what. Has it changed your writing at all?
No, because I think we all have our things that we're trying to say, right? I love your poetry. I could not write an Akula Leslie Hope poem because that's you.
A Jennifer Crow, although you were teaching me things now,
Well, that's the point of reading other poets, right? Is we learn things.
Right.
It's not to copy, but to expand our horizons.
Right.
But to be able to see ways of writing that are a bit different.
Yes.
And to tailor a submission to a particular magazine or venue is not selling out, to my mind. You're trying to give them what they want that will strike a chord with their readers who come looking for a specific thing.
To my mind, when people worry about that, I'm like, then you don't understand that you're still the vessel. Right. That you still have, you have Maine and a farm and pronking, right? And who else has that? I don't have that, right? Nope. And it's to me, it's so wonderful and amazing, and being without certain sorts of infrastructure, whereas I grew up in New York City with tons of infrastructure.
Which is very different, but it has its own magic, right?
The latest poem is about my magic city. So so yes, absolutely yes. But don't do that, because we're talking about you. So what inspires you?
Oh, gosh.
History, you're moved by history, but that's humongous. So there's probably some.
I have a magpie mind. I
find
you should see me in a bookstore. I'm like, well, this sounds interesting. And so right now I just picked up a book called The Death and Life of the Great Lakes, because now I'm living near Buffalo, so I'm right near Lake Erie. And that feels important, both in the sense of, how is the world as it is affecting the place where I live? Because there are a lot of issues surrounding the health of the Great Lakes and how do we protect them so that they continue to be a good resource. But also, this is grounding for where I am in the world. And I want to learn more about them because, I want to go visit Lake Erie and put my feet in it this summer when it's nice and hot, and then think about all the things that I've learned. And so I think there's inspiration everywhere. I started out reading books of folklore in our little public library. There was a whole shelf in this little, one-room library of those kids collections of folklore from different countries. And I went all the way through them,
Fabulous.
India and Egypt and Great Britain. And, I read everything I could get in that
Great
genre.
grounding for a poet of any kind, but especially for someone who loves the speculative.
Yes. So that was something that was always of interest to me. And now I've just expanded it. And I read a book recently about witchcraft traditions in Appalachia. So a little bit south of where I grew up,
Wow.
but just kind of, the ways that those hark back to where people came from before they settled in Appalachia, to the British folklore traditions, the
Well,
hedge witches.
I I I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm in
No.
Appalachia. So,
Mhm.
and I didn't realize Appalachia included this part, Western Seneca, that the Southern
Right.
Finger Lakes is considered. So when they talked about, I just wanted to ask, when they talked about Appalachia, though, is it the more traditionally conceived Appalachia, the more Southern
Yeah.
Appalachia versus it,
Right.
that it extends up to this part of the North?
Yeah. The author, I think, is in like Eastern Tennessee or Western North Carolina. So that kind of area. So this is the tradition she grew up in and actually practices based on what she learned from her family.
Oh,
So I'll send you her name and the book title later
that's
because it was really interesting.
very interesting.
Yeah,
So
but it's
that takes me to, that was my other question. I was going to ask, what are you reading and who are you reading?
everything I can get my hands
I
on.
know you told me you've got the Magpie Mind, and yeah, but tell us
Yep.
more.
So I've got the Great Lakes book. I'm reading The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, which I've heard a lot of good things about. That's
Cool.
a science fiction story that I'm really enjoying.
Ah,
Um, I'm reading a book about
sounded environmental. That's
yes, I'm reading a book about recent history in India
Hmm.
by a man from India who's talking about the politics and the upheavals there. So I thought that would be pretty interesting. And I want to learn about the different parts of the world
Mhm.
because I think
Excellent.
I see the way that how we behave impacts other people and vice versa. That things are so interconnected and there are patterns everywhere. And
We're
so
one blue marble.
yes,
This is
exactly.
this is one gassy envelope, and I'm delighted that you understand it that way and have shared your wonderful work. I mean,
Well,
our
thank you.
hour is up.
It has gone so fast
It's
and
gone
I have
so.
enjoyed this so much.
Oh, I'm so glad you did, because you're wonderful and your work is
Oh,
wonderful, and
thank you.
it's been a delight to talk to you. And I'm just going to double check, because I've asked all the questions and I don't see any. If anyone has one, we've got 60 seconds to go. And
Act now.
and if not, it's been fulfilling, it's been entertaining,
Oh,
it's
thank
been
you.
exciting. I good luck with this new collection, because what you shared with us was chilling and delightful,
Well, thank you.
and that's
I strive for that combination.
and
So
that I was just going to say, it was like I was at once unnerved and then intrigued and want to do that. And the one other thing that was um in your bio that we didn't talk about was the Advent.
I that is a project I want to do. So I
Oh,
will
okay.
talk more about that online as I get
So,
my butt in gear.
so we've got to follow you. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you, wonderful audience.
Yes, thank you so much for coming to hear me
Here
read.
on
I appreciate it.
Zoom and on Facebook. I don't want to ignore them, even though I can't see you. Thank you for coming. Stay well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.